Hi, everybody. I'm Sophie, co founder and CEO of VirtualSpeech, the leading provider of immersive soft skills training. We use virtual reality, mixed reality, and online role plays to improve skills by up to 25% in just 10 minutes. We want this webinar to be interactive, so please feel free to drop your comments and questions from whichever platform you're joining us from, and I'll make sure that we ask our guest. And today I am joined by Jeremy Dalton to demystify XR and help you make confident decisions for implementing immersive tech. Jeremy has been at the forefront of XR for over a decade and is the former head of XR at PwC UK. He's helped organizations around the world to successfully implement XR, advising companies like Pfizer, Lloyds Banking Group, and Network Rail. Jeremy is now a consultant and the author of Reality Check: How Immersive Technologies Can Transform Your Business. So, welcome today, Jeremy.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Absolute pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation, and demystifying XR is one of my favorite subjects. I've been speaking to business executives for 12 years plus now about the value of immersive technologies and the complexities behind it and all the misconceptions. So I'm very much looking forward to the conversation today.
Great, thank you. So, we'll start off with a bit of a warm up question. So, you've worked in this space for a very long time across a range of sectors. So, how has the conversation around immersive technologies evolved over the years?
So if we for a little bit of history, and I can't claim to have been in the immersive industry at this point, but in the early 90s, for those who were around, maybe not necessarily even in the industry, but maybe experiencing virtual reality at that time, there was certainly a lot of excitement, a lot of hype around the technology. And this was mainly confined to the consumer world, at least the hype was. And unfortunately, back then, we didn't have the processing power available to create smooth experiences, experiences that left users feeling comfortable, that led to definitive impact. We didn't have a lot of data on the return on investment. And unfortunately, the virtual reality industry at that point went into a little bit of a hibernation mode, only to be resurrected around 2012 when Palmer Luckey put the his Oculus Rift on Kickstarter, asked for $250,000, and we, the public, gave him $2.5 million to bring that product to life. And it was at that point that a lot of businesses started taking a real interest in the technology. And only 2 years later did Facebook, now Meta, buy Oculus, Palmer Luckey's company, for it was a total of $3 billion in the end. And since then, we've had the largest technology companies in the world investing time and money in this space. So whether it's a Microsoft, a Google, Samsung, ByteDance, Meta, of course, HTC, lots of different organizations playing in this space now, not only from a hardware perspective, from a software perspective as well. And the conversation has then evolved from early prototype devices, which were quite rough. I mean, I remember doing XR business work back around 2015, and you'll know this as well. We had to lug these really heavy military Pelican cases, hard shell cases, all around the world to be able to demonstrate the value of the technology. And these things weighed 22, 23 kilograms. So they were right on the edge of what you could consider, or what was allowed to be considered, check-in luggage on an airplane. I was constantly stopped at customs in different countries who were questioning why I was bringing in this seemingly alien technology into another
Mhm.
country. And then after all of that effort, you could only get one person into virtual reality through a spider web of connections to computers and sensors, which were mounted on tripods. It was really complicated back then. Thankfully, now we've got standalone headsets, so it's much easier. It's more intuitive. It's we're able to scale up in a much larger way as a result, reach more people. So the ability to implement virtual reality has become easier for sure since the first consumer headsets started really hitting the market era of virtual reality back in 2016. And COVID, of course, when that came around, that was a very interesting one because that spurred a lot of businesses to start thinking about the value of this technology, especially when it comes to remote collaboration and bringing different groups together. So I think COVID was a net positive for virtual reality. And then, of course, everybody started making a big deal about this thing called the metaverse. Now, many of you will have heard about the metaverse. Very few of you, including myself, will be able to tell you exactly what it is in a way that everybody agrees with. So we're not going to get into that whole thing. That subject's been done to death. But I will summarize the whole metaverse era by giving you my opinion on it and saying that it was a net negative for the industry. I don't consider it um, a positive happening or positive scenario because yes, it got virtual reality to more and more people and it definitely helped to spread the word about the technology. But there's no point in spreading the word about something in a negative fashion. And ultimately, what happened is its brand or its perception was damaged as a result. So a big deal was made about the metaverse. A lot of uh, haughty visions were sold to the public, and we were all left thinking this is going to change the world. But unfortunately, very little had actually changed under the hood. So the technology that we'd all been working on in a very sustainable fashion, slowly growing it, virtual speech very much a part of that journey, was was kind of just left a at least a little bit damaged by that whole era of the metaverse, and the public was certainly left feeling like they had been sold a faulty vision or an early vision, and ultimately disillusionment set in, and we had a pretty bad time in the industry for a couple of years. Thankfully, though, things are on the rise now. We've got companies re-entering this space: Google, Samsung, Apple, one of the most well-known and valuable companies in the technology space globally, getting involved with the Vision Pro and future headsets to come, of course. So there is now a lot more sustainable interest in the technology, and I think the conversation has shifted from one of un unsupported hype through to sustainable innovation that can deliver a return on investment in organizations. So I'm quite happy that we're in a stable place at the moment.
Yeah, it's much more driven now by a value driven interest rather than a buzzword driven interest, and people are actually looking for real impactful case studies rather than, I don't know, the latest marketing gimmick that they might try to use. So obviously, we know the background around XR and the value of XR, but there are still some misconceptions around it, which partly might have been fueled by that metaverse hype and people getting burnt in that initial instance, if that was the first time they used it. So, what's some of the most common misconceptions that you encounter when businesses explore XR for the first time?
I think businesses are very easy to dismiss the technology immediately off the back of it being, or them thinking it is a gaming technology, an entertainment technology, something their kids use, something their partner uses, but not something that is to be taken seriously in the business world. And that misconception was the motivation for me writing Reality Check. It was partly to try and really squash that idea that this technology has no business value because it has incredible business value. There are case studies from every industry all over the world about how this technology is being implemented in business right now. So that's one misconception that immediately gets thrown out the window. And we can conclude that yes, XR technology, the umbrella term for virtual reality and augmented reality, is absolutely a business technology. And you could even argue that it is a more important space in business than it is in the consumer world, which most people think the opposite, actually. Most people think because all they see in the media is these stories of it being used as a gaming technology, as an entertainment technology. and as a location-based entertainment technology specifically. And don't get me wrong, I think that is amazing. I am a part-time, or maybe more accurately referred to as retired video gamer myself, and so I really enjoy the all the innovation that is coming into the video gaming space through virtual reality right now. And I think that's really interesting. Location-based entertainment where you have to actually go to a specific location to have an arcade-like experience, so an experience you can't have at home, a really special, unique, visceral, immersive experience, going to a location for that. That business model is really maturing and has been maturing over the last few years. We're starting to see mainstream business magazines cover the increasing profitability that comes from the maturing business model of location-based entertainment in the VR space. So I think all very interesting stuff. And definitely the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people when we think about virtual reality, but that belies the fact that there is so much value in the business space, and you just don't hear about it. You don't hear about the tens of thousands of virtual reality headsets being used at Walmart for training. You don't hear about American Airlines having an entire virtual reality training center to train cabin crew on all sorts of different airplane models and different training procedures at the snap of a finger, or more accurately, perhaps the 3D movement of a finger in space. You don't hear about Chinese e-commerce companies using augmented reality on mobile phones to increase conversion rates for consumers adding products to their shopping cart. And all of these are legitimately heavily studied virtual reality and augmented reality use cases in every industry, in every country, and I cover many of them in Reality Check. And the whole point of this is really to break that misconception. Virtual reality and augmented reality is for business, and potentially it's even more so for business than it is for the consumer world. But I'm glad to see both succeed. That is one misconception. The second big misconception is this lack of scalability of the technology. This is a really big one. So even when organizations say, yes, okay, we see the value of virtual reality in business, but we can't really scale that up, right? We can't really deliver this to thousands of users at a time. It just doesn't make sense, right? All this hardware to these thousands or tens of thousands of people in our organization. We've got a lot of people. How do we get this hardware to them? And I find that a bit of a nonsensical conversation, to be honest, and a somewhat befuddling one, because we don't question how we get laptops to our workforce of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, as the case may be. We don't talk about how difficult it is to get mobile phones to our entire workforce. So, why is it a difficult conversation around delivering another piece of hardware through the same supply chain that already exists to our workforce? It doesn't make any
That's
sense.
such a good point.
So that is another misconception of the technology. And then I'd say the final one that I think is really pertinent is this idea that it doesn't have value in it only has value in certain industries or certain use cases. So immediately the first ones that come to mind for a lot of people is training. And training, absolutely, for sure. Very, very important use case, very popular use case for the technology. But what about asset visualization? The idea of being able to view different structures, buildings, machines, models, assets of any sort, anything physical that you haven't yet built, whether it's a little tool or a massive building. You have to produce that on a computer initially. Then you have to produce a physical prototype, usually. And then finally, you produce the final bit. But of course, being able to visualize that at a one-to-one scale and potentially even use that, walk through that, interact with it in some way, that has massive value in a lot of industries. So training, asset visualization, remote collaboration, and we'll get into like the data points behind this later on in the conversation. I just want to bring up the fact that remote collaboration is another use case. So how do we bring workforces closer together when you cannot be together face to face? really valuable use case. And the list goes on and on. There are subsections of these use cases, but I've been talking for far too long, so I will leave it there, and we can go on to the next subject and potentially touch upon some of the data points in a bit.
Mhm. Okay, so yes, there's various use cases for enterprise, and I think it's a good point bringing up data visualization because I think, as you say, people often focus on like training, and that kind of gets the headlines a bit more when it comes to enterprise uses of XR. So, how do you advise organizations to assess whether immersive tech and VR XR is even the right fit for their business challenge?
Yes, I think firstly, it's really about taking this from two directions. So, one is starting with the problem that you have and thinking, is virtual reality a good fit for this? Is there another technology that's a good fit? Is it not about a technology solution? Is it perhaps about a new way of working, a non technology innovation, so to speak? So, you can definitely start with the problem, and that's a very good place to start, and often a recommended one to avoid falling into this trap of being very technology centric. And the saying, if you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, even when it might be a screw. So if you're all about virtual reality, then you're constantly wanting to push virtual reality as a solution to every problem, but being mindful of all the other potential solutions, and also being mindful of virtual reality's drawbacks and its shortcomings, because it's not a silver bullet, absolutely not a silver bullet for every scenario. Then that really helps you to stay balanced and stay very measured when you're considering virtual reality as a business solution to solve a certain problem. So, starting from the problem side of things, and although a lot of people say, don't start with the solution, you can, if you have a very deep understanding of virtual reality and its strengths and weaknesses, you can certainly start from that perspective and think about the applicability to different problems, as long as you maintain that balanced mindset and think, does this really serve me, and does it serve my problem in the right way, in the best way, in the most optimal way? So I think that's probably a good starting point for considering the value of the technology in an organization.
And a lot of people who are tuning in are at the exploration phase and evaluating whether XR is the right solution for them and evaluating different platforms amongst that. So, what do you recommend that they consider when they're at those very early stages?
Yeah, so there are a lot of options now, and thankfully, much more so than before. So, when we were talking about the conversation changing, certainly back in the day, you had no option but to build custom software. So, anytime you wanted to solve one of your business problems, you had to build software from scratch. And so, it was really quite difficult because to a lot of organizations, it's fairly complex to build this stuff from scratch. You had to then know how to deploy that, and all the challenges that came along with it. But the point now is you still have that option. So certainly when something is very custom and you need to be very detailed or specific about the problem you're solving, yes, you can go down the custom route. And if you have the resources to do that, that's great. But nowadays we have a lot of low code, no code solutions available to us that solve basic business problems, at least, and that allow you at least at some elements of customization. So the ability to take a platform and either use it off the shelf as it is, and perhaps that's useful for some forms of training. So let's say when it comes to delivering difficult feedback or sales and marketing training, maybe it's diversity and inclusion training, whatever it is, there is those elements can be localized, but a lot of the time you can use off-the-shelf software, at least as a starting point for your training purposes in these elements. And but nowadays you have the low code, no code stuff that allows you a little bit of customization off the shelf. I think that's really important consideration as you're assessing all these platforms. And then I'd say when you're assessing platforms, the relationship with the vendor is something that is a given and a fairly obvious one. but not a lot of people really put it down as a bullet point specifically. And it's so critical before because we've been burnt by relations with vendors that didn't pan out in the way that we were hoping. So in terms of engaging and having the ability or having the faith in that organization to be able to deliver promptly, to be able to make the changes that you need to when you need to be able to offer support at the right time, especially for critical moments when you're running important demonstrations, when you're delivering important workshops, whatever the case may be. If you have faith in the vendor around their ability to meet your level of energy and importance and alertness or urgency, I think that is a point that is worth thinking about explicitly.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You're not just evaluating the platform, but you're evaluating the people that you're going to be working with and trying to build that trust with them as well, so that you ultimately get that impact and successful implementation. So, how can we help people to make confident decisions with this technology? So, I mean, what types of training outcomes have you seen immersive tech impact the most?
So I have seen really good results when it comes to the training space, but in particularly when we dig deeper into training, different layers of training. So anywhere where there is a requirement for human skills, for example, so where you need to connect with another human being, virtual reality has some real value there. And I'm sure people have seen the results of the PwC study that we released, talking about how you can train people faster. They can be more engaged with the content, emotionally connected to the content. The cost per learner comes down at a large number of learners. So there's a lot of benefits there when it comes to soft skills training or human skills training. But on the other side, when we talk about practical skills or anything where you need to have hands on training, so there is definitive value there. And often the benefits you see when it comes to that particular subset of training is around the efficiencies. So, how quickly you can perform this training, how accurately you can perform the training, how many errors are reduced as a result of this training versus other modalities of training. And maybe that's, we're comparing to e-learn, for example, and to classroom training. And again, by the way, this it's important to know that virtual reality is not the silver bullet. So classroom training definitely has value in certain instances. E-learning has value in certain instances, and virtual reality has value in certain instances. And when I say instances, I'm talking about different variables. So I'm talking not just about your particular use case specific example. So is it around learning new flight control methods on a certain airline? Is it about are you thinking what industry are you thinking about? Uh, what area of training are you interested in? So I think those particular elements are really important to think about when we consider the value of engaging in this way and the return on investment that you might get from implementing the technology.
Yeah, I think that's an important point about there being value across all methods of learning, that VR isn't the silver bullet. It's not going to solve all of your problems in and of itself. It's an extra tool in the box that is an extra option to complement other methods of training as well. And you mentioned using VR for human skills and soft skills. When you were at PwC, you were part of the team that led developing training around empathy and diversity called My Shoes. What were some of the results that you saw there, and what did you learn when deploying that training?
In My Shoes was really a flagship product for us when we built that. And for those who don't know, In My Shoes was built in collaboration with our multicultural business network team. And the idea was to try and tackle unconscious bias in organizations by allowing you to be on the receiving end of different microaggressions. And then that would lead into a physical, real life workshop with a trained organizational psychologist who would then walk through the experiences you had and talk about what you felt and dug deeper into those conversations. The really interesting thing about that is not only did we deliver that to 25,000 staff in the UK, it was such a powerful application that it eventually spun off into multiple localized applications that went to the United States, that went to Australia, that went to organizations in banking, in retail, in many different industries. It was so powerful. We had to very early on implement a trigger warning disclaimer at the beginning because it did lead to a lot of emotions and a lot of distress in some cases because it was being on the receiving end of those microaggressions was very close to home, which was the aim. I mean, we had engaged with the Multicultural Business Network because we wanted to bring to life real stories. We wanted to tell them authentically, and we wanted to be able to generate those empathy levels related to the lived workplace experience and for a lot of people. And so we worked with a PhD student to analyze this rollout to the 25,000 staff members. What we found is that if you considered a baseline, so somebody who hasn't been through any of the training, we start there, we consider that, zero. If we gave them the experience that we created, if we gave them the software in my shoes, on a computer screen, so a laptop usually in front of them, we saw empathy levels increase. And that's great, It's what we were hoping to see, given that it does tell a lot of different stories, and you do feel a lot, coming through that experience. So empathy levels definitely increased when we ran this on desktop. When we took the very same experience, this experience that was built for a virtual reality headset, and we put it in VR, and we found that the empathy levels increased to their highest levels. So this was really interesting for us because it showed us that the same content shown on a laptop or a desktop computer screen was effective, but not as effective as the user being immersed in that experience in virtual reality. And that, I think, is a really interesting and exciting data point to consider when people challenge, and this is perhaps another misconception to add to that argument, when they challenge, why don't we just do this as an e-learn? Why don't we just watch a video? Why don't we just talk, listen to someone on stage? The All of those scenarios, you're on the outside looking in. In virtual reality, you feel part of that experience, for better or worse. And the strength of the medium really is to do with your level of immersion into that scenario. And that can be maneuvered in different ways to achieve different business outcomes. So, talking about what we were mentioning before, improvement in training efficiency, increase in empathy levels, all this sort of stuff you get because of the strength of virtual reality, which is the immersion into the experience that is very different from any medium we've had before, where you have always been an outsider, a third party looking in.
That's brilliant to be able to compare the same content delivered in two different ways. And you mentioned about how people would have quite a strong response to that in either setting, but especially when using the VR headsets. So, how did you conduct that training? Was that part of a workshop, the way you then deconstructed the experience that they'd had?
So, this was run as a dual virtual reality experience slash physical reality workshop. And what we did is if you're talking about the PhD analysis of that, there was a pre and post questionnaire, and it was based on a um, a well known and understood framework for managing, or not managing, but for recording empathy in different scenarios. So this framework wasn't specific to our experience. It's a framework that had been used by academia to study different scenarios in different industries, nothing to do with virtual reality, in fact. But because it was well studied, it was taken and used here. So pre and post and multiple post questionnaires as well that were not only short term but were more medium term as well, to try and understand, is this a fleeting increase or is this a sustainable increase? And thankfully, we did see that it was a sustainable increase. And I think if we were to extend that study, we'd probably look at more long term impacts as well. I think it would be interesting to revisit after 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, even. So, possible extension for that study too.
Brilliant. And so obviously you rolled that out across 25,000 people. How do you get internal buy-in for introducing VR into an organization? So obviously when you're at PwC, they'd already invested in the team, but when you then go to other regions that haven't got their own like VR teams, for example, how do you inspire people to invest into this technology?
So, as uninspiring as it sounds, it's always got to start with the data for most businesses. And the way we have usually done it, you're either this workflow works where you start with data, you use that to get a meeting with an important stakeholder, you use the meeting to then get them to experience the technology firsthand. So, in other words, a demonstration. And then following the demo, usually you're able to convert them if you've done that demo in the right way. So, delivered powerful content smoothly and showing its relevance to the business problem. If you do all that, chances are you'll be able to make that sale. Now, not everybody starts from the very beginning with the data points. Some people go straight into, let's get him into a headset and they can experience and become a champion for the technology off the back of that experience. And I've seen that work too. But you have to be very careful because if you are relying wholly on that experience, you are putting a lot of stake in that going right. So, in other words, you're raising the risk level for succeeding in that sale. If that demo goes wrong, then it will go wrong in a spectacular way that will damage the sale not only now but for the foreseeable future. If you start with the data points and that is interesting enough to gain a meeting and then a demo, and the demo doesn't go quite right, you can still fall back on the data points being there. And the stakeholders are usually a little bit more forgiving because they know there is value, they've seen the evidence, and perhaps they'll chalk this down to a bad demo, of which we have many, not only in the virtual reality industry. I'm sure everybody appreciates the unfortunate anxiety that comes before demoing anything. And I've had it so many times where you have prepped something the day before, works perfectly, you've tested all the connections, the firewalls, the sensors, everything's running. Then, just as an extra precaution, you test it half an hour before and everything's great. It all goes smoothly. And then you get on stage and you deliver it half an hour later and something inevitably goes wrong. It is so painful, but that is the nature of not just emerging technology, but everyday contemporary technology, unfortunately. So the point being, stuff goes wrong, technology goes wrong all the time. It doesn't have to be a mature technology for it or an immature technology for it to go wrong or an early stage tech for it to go wrong. So at least hedge your bets, deliver some data points and allow the business case to be built on more than just the single structure of a demo. I think that's a really important one. And the other one, which a lot of people don't think about, is you don't need to go right to the top. This doesn't have to be a big thing initially. It doesn't have to come from the executive board. In fact, a lot of the implementations that I've seen have come from grassroots initiatives, which is really interesting. We were dealing with a healthcare organization and we found that there was actually quite prolific use of virtual reality in this organization, but there was no executive strategy around delivering it. There was no definitive, note coming from the top of support saying this should be done. It was simply being done because there was value in it, and the staff on the ground delivering those healthcare services saw enough value on it to be able to do it. So I think it's important not to underestimate the ability to drive a decent amount of change to begin with without requiring extensive executive support. And the reason I say that is a lot of executives are far too busy to be bothered at the initial stage of whether you want to do a virtual reality implementation or not. What is far more interesting to them is going to them having delivered a successful virtual reality implementation at a smaller scale. So, in other words, having the first of all autonomy and authority to deliver something smaller scale within a subset of your organization, and being able to get data out of that enough to show that this should be invested in and there should be further growth for the use case. And at that point, then it becomes really interesting to take this to higher levels within the organization to try and build out further.
So lead with the data, not the demo, is what I'm taking from that.
I like that. That's a good way
Um,
of saying it.
um, so if we're leading with data, you referred to the PwC study that was done in, I think it was 2019 now. And I see those numbers float around a lot on various websites, even though it wasn't their specific product that was used and so on. But it is notoriously difficult for people to get impactful data in the learning development space in general, let alone then when you're in more of an emerging industry. So, what advice do you have for either learning and development teams on measuring the ROI of immersive learning, but also how can XR providers work alongside those teams to measure the return on investment?
So when it comes to ROI, it really depends on your use case here. So if you if you consider what you're trying to achieve, that will impact what you try and measure. So if I try and give you some examples that are based on real life use cases, for example, if you're in manufacturing and you are trying to improve let's say, the quality assurance mechanism or function within the organization, then you might want to look at things like, what has been the wastage of product produced as a result of the incorrect identification of faults, or has the process resulted in these components being produced in a shorter amount of time. If you're talking about retail, perhaps you might look at the ability of organizations to convert products. So to take products from a potential interest of the customers into the shopping cart and then through to sale. So there's multiple channels you can get to. If we're talking about training, then we can look not only at efficiencies like time, but we can look at outcomes like empathy, like we mentioned within my shoes. We can look at satisfaction of the end user with the training scenario. We can look at the replayability, or the customizability of the application. We can look at the learning outcomes themselves. So, in terms of it just being a tick box, have you learned this specific topic area or not? And I think those are interesting areas, and where you have a training factor that can be measured on a spectrum. So it's not just a one and a zero. Maybe it's you got this 50% right, you got this 70% right, you got this 90% right. Then it becomes interesting enough to be able to measure not only your improvement over time, but also the acceleration, so the speed at which you make those improvements. So a lot of it comes down at the end of the day to efficiencies, whether that's cost efficiencies or time efficiencies. Those are the sort of high level areas that a lot of the lower level results tend to feed up to at the end of the day.
Mhm. It's interesting to be able to do what you did with In My Shoes as well, where you track the effectiveness over time as well. So you don't just do it straight after the experience or a week later. You do it across a longer period of time too. I'm conscious of time. I don't know where the last 45 minutes has gone. But if we have a couple of questions that focus a bit more of along like future emerging trends, and then we'll go to Q&A. So if people got any questions, pop them in the chat. So yeah, we've both been in the space for nearly a decade now, and seen a lot of technology evolve over the last few years, and that comes with sister technologies as well that naturally lend themselves for use with XR. So if we think of the explosion of generative AI over the last few years, which I mean, it can bring the added depth, interactivity, personalization to XR training. How do you see AI and XR evolving together over the coming years, especially when it comes to learning and development?
So, in Reality Check, I produced this framework which I think explains the AI XR complementary integration reasonably well, or at least at a high level for people to then work towards their own micro results on how they would use it together. But if we consider that a user engages with an XR application, and that is the front end of your system, so everything you can visually see. In the back end, we have artificial intelligence doing its thing. Now, 101 AI can certainly help generate content for XR. That's true. It's becoming easier and easier to generate 3D assets, to deal with animations, and so on and so forth. But that's not really the interesting area for me. The interesting area for me is the feedback loop that comes from you as a user interacting with an XR experience through which you generate data, which gets fed into the AI system and which the AI system uses to then influence or manipulate the experience in some sort of way. So from you can apply that to a lot of the use cases that we talked about. So it's not just for training. It could apply to remote collaboration as well. It could apply to asset visualization. But let's take the training use case. You are conducting a certain training, and you mess up on one area, let's say. AI system retrieves that information, shows that you've messed up. You then repeat that training, you mess it up again. So, more and more, there's this richness of data that's being fed into the system. And perhaps you can start to make some interesting observations about the mess up. So, maybe you start to change the scenario bit by bit. You change one factor, or the AI system changes one factor and has you repeat it. You still mess it up. It changes another factor, and then you succeed. It maintains that factor and tries to run a controlled experiment now, and then finds you continuously succeeding. So maybe it says, okay, it's clear that they understand the concept when it comes to this particular factor, but it is when I introduce this complication where they fall down. Okay, so now that I understand that, I'm going to hammer them with that complication, maybe interspersed with a few of the areas that they know to maintain their morale, to allow them to overcome that complication, to figure out a solution for that, and maybe offer them some tips and guidance to escort them in the right direction, and then eventually get them to a place of full learning. So get them to 100%. And I think, that's just one example of how you could have an AI assisted learning and development scenario, customized scenario. But of course, you can think of millions of examples of how AI and XR could work together in your particular scenario using this framework. So consider that feedback loop, as you think about the value of integrating artificial intelligence with XR technology.
couldn't agree more about the feedback loop. I mean, at Virtual Speech, we predominantly use AI around the feedback, and the AI can help to change the experience and make it more dynamic for learners, where the avatars respond based on the unique learner input, which is different from for every individual. Then they get feedback on various criteria and insights on their performance, and then they can discuss that with an AI avatar coach and then go back in and learn from their experience and have another unique opportunity. Are there any other technologies that you think are kind of under the radar at the moment and could strengthen the impact of immersive learning, whether that's now or more in the future?
So I've been playing around with a lot of different technologies that I think are complementary to XR. And certainly in the field of haptics, I find it quite interesting. I would like to see more scientific studies being done on that, but I can see the value from on a theoretical basis there, in terms of being able to provide you with extra feedback on a particular application that you're trying to conduct, usually a hard skills training application where you need to use your hands. Equivalently, when you are in a virtual world, I have seen applications being used in the German local government where they've used omnidirectional treadmills. So the idea being you can walk forever in a virtual world using a relatively limited physical space with this omnidirectional treadmill. And so if you want to train firefighters to lug around, whatever it is, 20 kilogram plus of kit on their back, with a full face mask and with all the gear that comes with being a firefighter. You want to be able to have them train in a way that tests them physically and physiologically. So having them walk for a kilometer makes sense, but where are you going to get that kilometer of space from? You can certainly go to a certain area, but that requires a lot of logistics and a lot of hassle and a lot of coordination. If you have a headset and an omnidirectional treadmill, you can spin up any environment you want, as we did in the Hessen area in Germany, with the local firefighting team there, and we found ourselves on a train underground which was on fire, and we had to walk through all of the train carriages to get to the source of that fire and then identify what
Wow,
to do next. So I thought that was really interesting.
that's really cool. We'll go to some audience questions. So there were a couple of questions that were sent in before the webinar. So I'll do that one first. How do you address the objections of people resistant to change when you deliver VR training? And how do you inspire enthusiasm about VR with them and bring them on that journey with you?
So we talked about a few misconceptions. One that I actually missed, which I think is worth bringing up again because it relates to this, is this disbelief in the technology, or this disillusionment in the technology because of headlines that are coming out around VR is dead, around Meta wasting, I put in quotation marks, billions of dollars, losing, I put in quotation marks, billions of dollars on virtual reality development. And this is not something that we apply with so much scrutiny to any other organization. So I can guarantee you, I haven't seen their financial statements specific to VR because they probably don't have any. But Apple has certainly spent billions of dollars on research and development in the VR AR space over the last decade or so. But we don't scrutinize them or criticize them in the same way because they simply don't release those figures publicly. So, and in fact, those any research and development efforts there are hidden to some extent within the wider ecosystem of revenue that comes from their phones and their services and all their other products and services. So, this idea of lambasting Meta for losing or wasting billions on the failed dream of virtual reality is a completely nonsensical argument because this is a new generation of computing at the end of the day, and it is going to require billions more of investment to get it to the stages that we want, that we are all hoping for, where it's just a smooth, seamless experience with hardware that we barely even recognize as a technology device on our face. And so this is another big sticking point that that should be mentioned. But in terms of going back to the core question here, how do we inspire people despite those misconceptions? I think it comes from the experience. So inspiration comes from experience. The the data points that we spoke about before, they can deliver a business case. So theoretically, they can deliver data delivers results, experience delivers inspiration. How about that for a tagline?
Oh, I like that.
It's all about the experience at the end of the day. I can't tell you how many times I have delivered a virtual reality demo and had someone convert from a naysayer to not only someone that is positive about the solution, but is also now actively engaged in what else we can do. So the conversation has moved on from negotiating about the viability of the technology through to what if we use the technology for something else that we hadn't even discussed in the first place. So their mind is now racing, is being inspired by this experience. And all of a sudden, we have all these different ideas that we are working back and forth together on. So I think it comes down to experience at the end of the day.
Great, I agree. It's also a really interesting point you made about how Meta get lambasted um, for the supposed losses that they're making at Reality Labs, but it's disguised in other people's books, and there's always financial losses when it comes to research and development until you get to that point. We've actually had quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to do a quick fire round of some of them. Let me just scroll through some of them first. So, how can you evaluate the success or impact of VR beyond just the numbers?
Beyond just the numbers, if we're talking about qualitative data, then it will come down to user feedback at the end of the day. So we can talk about these questionnaires that we ran. To be fair, the In My Shoes questionnaire was quantitative, but you can also pursue qualitative data as well around how people feel at the end of the experience. You know, what lessons have they learned? What would they do differently? And all of that insight's really useful because you can use that to compare to the results that the results of that question that you got using different modalities. So I think that is really interesting. I think a lot of people talk about the improvement in brand equity. So the increase to your brand value as a result of dealing with innovations, implementing them successfully, onboarding new talent. And though that is far more difficult to manage, and sales and marketing will talk to you about how difficult that is to measure. But there are certainly advantages there, and a lot of people pursue virtual reality to achieve those advantages. The only caveat I would say here is that pursuing virtual reality purely for sales and marketing advantages when there is no substance behind what you're building is a recipe for disaster because it's absolutely not sustainable. It's short term gain at the expense of long term damage because the technology, if not used appropriately, will eventually fall by the wayside and its reputation will be impacted. Uh, and that will affect your ability to use that tech in the future in the organization.
Mhm, absolutely. Um, a question from Matthew Coxon. Some emerging academic literature suggests users reflecting on the experience with others may be important to get the full impact of VR training modules. How well does this fit with your experience in enterprise?
Users reflecting on the experience with others important to gain the full impact of VR training modules. Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. Based on my personal experiences with all the VR implementations that we've deployed in organizations, including when I was within PwC within the firm, um, the the experiences that had the greatest impact were the ones where we had some sort of physical experience afterwards, where people could get together and discuss, reflect, exchange ideas, brainstorm potential solutions. That human element or that outside VR element is strangely regularly dismissed when it comes to implementing virtual reality. And I think there more importance should be placed on that in order to get the most value out of it. And we can certainly, I'm more than happy, Matthew, if you want me to dig into more detail on that, I definitely happy to have a conversation on LinkedIn with you about the specific applications and what we found.
Great, thank you. Um, Something that we commonly hear from universities is the impact of soft skills and the need to develop them more since COVID. Have you seen any impact or trends from the pandemic? And I have a feeling this might link to another question where somebody has asked what opportunities exist in the collaboration space.
Yeah. So the pandemic definitely boosted, at least our team in the immersive space, and certainly remote collaboration became an increasingly important concept. I wouldn't. It certainly wasn't. We haven't we're not at those levels post pandemic, so there was an improvement. So there was this little bit of a boost, or a hill on the graph. It did decrease after the pandemic, but it certainly hasn't dropped to the pre-pandemic level. So I think there was a sustained increase, but it wasn't as high as the initial blip that we got from the immediate pandemic effect. And I think the pandemic impacted not only virtual reality, but technology in general and remote collaboration in general, and the opportunities that come from implementing interesting technologies or useful technologies when it comes to remote collaboration. And I'd say that virtual reality was one of those key technologies. And we're certainly seeing real results from using VR for remote collaboration that go beyond video conferencing. To sort of summarize this really quickly, we ran a study with the University of Munster in Germany, with the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Lower Saxony, and we found, amongst a lot of other results, a 58% increase in connectiveness with your colleagues when engaging with them in a virtual reality workshop versus the equivalent workshop done over video conferencing. And I think that's really interesting and telling, and a sign of the value of this use case of remote collaboration for the future of virtual reality. And if you want to read more about that study and see all of the numbers associated with it, it was released in full for the first time in my book, Reality Check. So definitely check that out.
Yeah, definitely. And something I would add there in terms of an impact that we have seen in virtual speech post pandemic um, is in terms of the public speaking training that we do, that both at universities and on an enterprise level, that people have got so used to talking in meetings via camera or presenting via camera that then when they went back into the physical workplace, something that people were very nervous about was actually like standing up and presenting and taking up space because everybody got so used to sitting down and the kind of safety of a laptop that they weren't used to standing up and presenting anymore, which I think is really interesting. Two more questions for anyone who can stay behind for 2 more minutes. Are there specific use cases you think VR is particularly well suited within the soft skills space?
Within soft skills, I would say we have certainly found very interesting results in the public speaking area. So, virtual speech is bread and butter. It's what it originally started out, specializing in. Public speaking, I think, is really valuable. I would say the other elements that we've seen have been in unconscious bias. I mentioned in my shoes. Other areas around sales and marketing, I think that has been really valuable. And then I'd say, what else have we seen in the human skills or soft skills space? Anything to do with inter-organization communication, which is valid in most functions, in most organizations, in most industries, and most geographies. So anywhere where you need to improve communication that is not a public speech per se, it's perhaps a one-on-one conversation. You're trying to make a point. You're trying to maybe present some information, reflect on an experience you had, present some data. It's very useful to be able to bring up an instant training scenario to allow you to practice that with an opposite stakeholder party without having to involve someone, which is a big hassle, and having to introduce that person to what you're trying to do, and the not wanting to spend a lot of their time. I think virtual reality is great for being able to build that connection, or build those skills in a very convenient way.
Mm. Yeah, like your leadership skills around difficult conversations. We're seeing an
Leadership
increase
skills is
in,
a good one. Exactly. Yeah.
and we're seeing an increase in like conflict resolution as well. So it's like de-escalation um, in like a hospital is something that we have seen if there's a conflict going on there, or in student housing, like resident association conflict resolution as well is an interesting use case we've seen. Um, Going to end on a fast forwarding by 10 years. What's one way you think XR will be impacting training that we're not even talking about yet?
Ooh, one way it will impact training that we're not talking about yet. Mm, mm, mm.
Who knows what's going to happen in 10 years?
Yeah, I would say if we think about the trends in the XR industry, we know that hardware is becoming more transparent. So it's disappearing. We want it to disappear. We don't want to seem like we're wearing this technology, but we want to be able to take advantage of it at the same time. So we have technology that is miniaturizing, that is becoming more transparent, and we then have the the trend of AI XR integration. So we talked a bit about that as well. Now, if both of those things happen in the future, I can certainly see on the job training becoming really interesting, because right now there's a remote assistance use case, right? And this is more an augmented reality one, but bear with me and I'll bring it back. Where you can, a senior engineer or someone senior back at base can see what you're looking at and advise you accordingly. Now, if we replace that senior individual and give them the ability to go off and do something else, while an AI takes care of everything as it's happening with the individual, I think that could be really interesting. So we've got this, let's hope for all day battery life, pair of glasses, able to switch between augmented reality overlays and full virtual reality at the click of a button, or maybe at the whim of an AI. And you're going in, and maybe you're messing around with an elevator system or some bit of machinery, and you're about to make a mistake that is going to cost the business millions and millions of pounds or dollars. And the AI quickly catches you in the act and says, "Stop! If you do that, you're going to blow the system, because of X, Y, and Z. I don't know what." But it's able to detect that because it sees everything you're doing. It knows about the system. It has all the training on the system. I can definitely see that happening. So, and always on AI system that is constantly giving you guidance and giving you training, so that the training currently right now there is a beginning and an end to training, right? But in the future, if these trends happen and become a reality, I can see that always on training trend happening.
I totally agree. I think it will just become more integrated with our everyday lives and augment our reality further. So what we experience will be the same, but almost our vision of the world will change. And our also I think it's important that the kind of perception of training changes as well. That and if we have that always on approach, everybody will be able to see the relevance for their work and the
Yeah,
impact.
and let's be honest, right? It probably, the perception should change, because we are constantly learning from birth till death, right? There is no point in life, in any facet of life, that we really stop learning completely. So why would you have discrete on off for training when everything is a learning exercise, or everything you do and every experience you have in life, professionally or personally, can be learned from? Why would you
Mhm.
not want to take advantage of that?
Mm, absolutely. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for taking the time to share your advice and insights. We have sent a link to your book in the chats on YouTube and LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to grab a copy of Reality Check, there are links in the chats. If people want to contact you or stay in touch, how can they do so?
You can go to jdxr.co, and that should take you straight to my LinkedIn profile, and you can contact me there. And I think jdxr.io goes to a mini website which has a lot of projects that I've been involved in, a lot of reports that I've led or contributed to, as well as my social media profile. So you got those two options.
Very good, thank you. And thank you everybody who joined us live today and asked interesting questions. Sorry if we didn't get round to your question. We run these webinars every few weeks, and the last one a few weeks ago was with Andy Trainer, former CLO of Walmart. So if you missed that one, be sure to check that out on our YouTube channel. Look forward to seeing you all at the next one, where we'll be continuing to speak to people with real experience and real impact in the VR training space. Thanks again, Jeremy, and have a great rest of your
My
day.
pleasure.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Sophia. Thanks, everyone.